Well, here we are again with another Tell Me a Story. As you know, this is brought to you by the Friends of the Sandwich Town Archives, otherwise known as Foster. We're pleased to bring you another Tell Me a Story, and I have with me today brother and sister Janet Richards MacLean and her brother Eddie MacLean.
Yep.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Well, you have such a rich history, your family does, going back probably about, if I calculate it right, about 75 years with your parents. So I'd sort of like to start there. And before they even came to South Sandwich, if you could give me a little bit of a glimpse of them before they were married, where they were living, how they met, prior to locating in South Sandwich.
Mm-hmm.
Tag, you're it.
Well, I'll do my best. They were married in April of 1941.
Okay.
They met. Our mother went to college with Dad's brother, Philip, and she met Dad through Philip, and they dated, and Mother was living in New York, and our father was in the Merchant Marines, and so he wasn't home a lot because he was out on a ship. So they communicated a lot by mail.
Back in those days, sure.
Back in those days.
Snail mail today.
And
Yep.
and I saved some of. I had some of their letters that I saved and read. And one
Now,
of the
this was when your dad was off in World War II.
Right.
On the ship. Yep.
Right.
And your mom was still stateside.
He was a merchant mariner. Yeah, he was on. Yes. And lost my train here.
And he used to write to her.
He used to write to her, and I was going to start with the property. They bought the property in, I believe it was November of 1944. And on one of his trips when he was out, he wrote something to her regarding how, he'd like to come back and just sit and commune with nature, and her, of course. And he mentioned Dunroman. And Dunroman is the name of our business, Dunroman Cottages and Trailer Park. So I didn't realize that he already had the name before he had the property, years before he had the business.
So he really had a vision.
So I guess he did.
For what he wanted to do when he got out of the service.
Right.
Yep.
So he built the house. Well, he had some help. He built the house himself, and he really wasn't a carpenter because all his family had gone to sea, generations. But he built the house. He had hired some people to help him because he wasn't always there.
Now this is, if we can situate where this is, and and the name of your parents.
Okay. Our parents were Lloyd and Carol MacLean.
Yep.
And
her maiden name was?
our mother's maiden name was Thomas.
Okie doke, yep.
And her parents lived in Osterville.
So she grew up in Osterville?
No, she didn't. When she was a teenager, they moved to Osterville in the 30s. Our grandfather was a caretaker to an estate, and she went away to school. But it was afterwards, when they were married and Dad was going to sea, and they decided to buy some property, she came and lived with them for a while and gave up the apartment in New York, and I think worked on the Cape. She was a dietitian. I think she might have worked at the hospital. She did work at the hospital for a while. And to save money, because they used to live on her paycheck and bank his. Can you imagine? Wouldn't you like to do that today?
Yeah. Where did she graduate from?
She graduated from Pratt Institute in New York.
And you said with a degree as a dietitian?
Correct.
Yes.
Associate's degree.
Now, Eddie, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your father's education before.
He went to graduate from Mass Maritime. Back in the 1920s. It was down in Fall River, and the training ship back then was the Ranger.
Ranger.
It was steam and wind. It was a three-masted ship, and that was where they lived and had classes, was on the ship. And then during World War II, he was on oil and chemical tankers. He was different places, but he told me once he went to Murmansk, Russia, on a convoy, and he also was in the Pacific, and he went to French Polynesia. So he went all over the place. Unfortunately, I didn't ask him enough because I looked at his logbook that everybody had. It only shows when he comes to the United States and when he leaves. It doesn't show where he goes.
Because that was World War II, right? They probably couldn't do that.
But it's like he'll come out of Galveston, Texas, and like a month later he shows up on the California coast, and it's like, where did he go?
Now, where in that whole month? Yes.
And sometime during all that, and I don't know where, I guess he was in a convoy at one point, and he said the ship in front of him and the ship behind him were torpedoed.
Oh boy.
So he liked it better when he wasn't in a convoy. I guess he was very lucky.
Well, World War II, perhaps you don't hear as much about the Merchant Marine, but they were vital to the effort. So he went really all over the world, although frankly, you really can't tell us exactly where because,
And he worked on tankers after the war, but because at the time he didn't have a college degree, he just had Mass Maritime back in the 20s was a trade school, so that's part of his high school.
Oh yes.
So he didn't really have a college degree back then. Now it's a college degree.
Sure.
And so they thinned out the staff of sailors that didn't have. He was a deck officer. So, anyways, I think he was third or second mate. Second mate. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then he started working as a carpenter. He became a union carpenter because he got jobs up at Otis. This is the 50s, early 60s when they were building up the base.
Sure.
And they were doing housing, and he did that. One thing, after the war, after World War II, he had a Pierce Arrow vehicle, and he was a taxi man. He did a lot of taxi work out of Otis.
Oh, okay.
Camp Edwards mainly, but it was something. And I wish I had pictures of it, but I didn't.
I do.
Oh,
and,
okay.
When they did move to Sandwich and they had the house built, the vehicle they had to use was a military truck.
Weapons carrier.
4-wheel drive.
A weapons carrier.
Yeah, it's a
was our
Dodge.
family-
It
that
was
was our
like a
family
3/4 ton truck. But because John Muir Road at that time was dirt,
Yes.
and so, if you didn't have 4-wheel drive back then, you wouldn't be able to get anywhere.
So maybe we should actually locate where your trailer and cottage site is, Dunroman. Where in South Sandwich, so people know.
5 John Muir Road.
Well, that's the house.
That's
Yep.
the house.
The
but-
house, which is down near the
Yeah,
boat ramp.
and then-
But that whole property from the boat landing over to, I used to say DeGrasse,
Peters Pond Park.
Peters Pond
And,
Park
and
is.
out to Katuitt
Yeah,
Road
it probably would
at
have
the time.
1,000 feet of waterfront, and it used to go from the pond to Katuitt Road. But when our mother died, we sold some lots
Some
up
of it.
there.
Yeah.
Now, do you know any history of that area in South Sandwich, prior, of course, to your parents? That would be early history.
Yeah, well, wasn't it owned prior to the people that had the Keith Car Works?
Correct. It was a farm. They owned it, and then they had their summer house on Mashpee Lake. The property went. I forget how many acres, because what Dad and Mom bought was only part. When they bought the property, they bought 40 acres.
Okay.
But it was only part of the property because it went right over to Mashpee Lake. It went
Wow.
from there, went right straight across.
Wow,
But
that's
he
huge.
didn't want
Yeah.
that much, and he didn't want the property in Mashpee, which was probably a good thing because I don't know, at some point in time, the town, there was a dispute, and so
with
if
the
you own
Indians
land in
and land.
Mashpee, it
With the
was held
Wampanoag,
up.
as to who owned land,
Well,
yes.
it was just, so it was a good thing we didn't
Yeah.
have
Yes.
that.
And the strange thing is that we, during the life of the time that we've had the property, we've discovered a water line that was probably put in 1920s or 30s from where Janet lives at 11 John U Road, crossing John U Road, going down through my property and over to Mashpee to Deerfield Road. There used to be a water tank.
Oh.
And the line went from there down to the Peters Pond where they had a well not too far from the pond, and they would pump it up the hill to my sister's house, and then they would pump it across the street to the water tower.
Oh my! Now is this
near my house? There was a little farmhouse, and our parents were going to renovate it, but it was burnt down in the fire of '46. In April of '46, it was a bad fire.
Yeah.
That burnt that whole area.
So let's talk a little bit about, okay, in 1944, they bought the property. I'm going to guess there wasn't much there when they bought the property. Can you tell us about that and how they developed your property and your trailer and cottage property?
Okay, well, it wasn't until, I think it was 52, 53, they started with a business, and they started with 2 cottages.
Okay.
And it sort of mushroomed from there. And then in 1959, well, first Dad had to make a road into where he was going to build cottages on the pond. And so he made a road in, had to take out a lot of holly. Well, if you knew our father, you didn't cut holly.
Yes.
So he transplanted all these little holly trees, and he transplanted them up into the circle of the driveway of where I now live. And that was, he did that in 1958. And
and they took?
The flower, oh, why can't I think of the name of it? Barnstable,
Agricultural?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
They told him the trees would never live because he moved them in the summertime. But they did not know Dad. Because he had them wrapped in burlap, and he watered and watered them. So if anybody wanted to go by, you can see those trees today. They're still there.
Too bad that we left them so close, because now they're like 3 or 4 feet apart from each other, and they're like 20 feet tall. So
you don't think about that when you're first planting.
I'm sure he didn't think about it either.
Yeah, exactly.
But he just wanted to move them someplace, and So
now, prior to 1953, your parents bought the property in '44. Did they start living there?
They moved into the house.
Okay.
In June of '46.
Okay.
The house wasn't finished, but they moved in.
And they built the house.
Yes, and
Tell us about that.
Well, it's kind of hard. I wasn't there. I didn't come until August. So.
Yeah. No. But the stories. That's what you.
Well, yeah. As far as building, well, yes. Well, one, in having the truck, they were able to get materials. So they go to the lumber yard to get lumber. And they go every day, and Mom said she'd go to the lumberyard, get lumber, come and unload it, and go to another lumberyard. Because if you went to a lumberyard and had lumber on your truck, they would not sell you lumber. Now you could, you go, I don't know how much you could get. You could come back tomorrow and get more, but they'd only give you so much. So she said she used a lot of.
They were rationing the.
So they used a lot of gas.
Yeah. And they picked up. They used the weapons
carrier.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So all right. So they built the house that you grew up in.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. And they built it from the ground up. I think I remember you telling me that they actually dug the foundation.
Yeah. Well, they made a small cellar. A small cellar that with bricks, and they dug that with a hand pick and shovel. I have a picture of that. They literally dug that, and believe me, there's a lot of stones because I made a garden down next to the house, and I had a few choice words to say because there's so many stones down there, and it's clay.
Planted all those stones there.
Now, you talked about a forest fire back in 1946. That was, I do happen to know, that was a huge fire on the Upper Cape. How did they fare with that fire, having their buildings there and everything, because they had started to build at that point.
Well, yeah, they did. There was a building, there was a corn crib up the hill that's in the park that they must have watered the heck out of. But anyway, but that area was sort of open, that they had a lot of their stuff stored in it.
Yep.
And then there was the farmhouse, which did burn, and they were building their house. And I think probably the fact that there was a perimeter around it, and I'm sure they watered it too.
Not too far from the pond.
Right. But you didn't have the equipment and stuff that you have today.
Yes.
You know, our mother found out about the fire. She was coming out of St. Mary's Church in Barnstable, and her brother went by on the fire truck and said, "Carol, you better get up to your place, there's a fire."
Oh, boy.
So they came up, and I guess a fish and game guy said to him, you know, "Carol, you shouldn't be here," because he knew she was pregnant. And she says, "Well, you got somebody to stay with Lloyd?" And they said, "No." She said, "I'm not leaving." So, you know, I think
the
they were
two of
very
them-
lucky that
The two of them helped to fight the fire?
well, I'm sure they
Is that what
stayed.
the story is?
Yeah.
So
In fact, there's a dirt berm still on the property from when the firefighters was trying to fight the fire. And that same berm is at the conservation area behind the new police station. I forget the name of it now.
Oh, is that?
Something Farms.
Yeah.
Bolton Farms, is it?
Well, I guess.
The conservation.
If you go down there, they have that same dirt berm crossing part of there.
They do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Wow. So they lost some property, they lost some buildings, but
Yeah,
they
and the
managed.
trees, of course.
And trees, yes, yeah, but they persevered.
Yeah.
And so first you had cottages, and then they were able to bring in some trailers. Is that
Right.
correct? About when did that happen?
59, 60, the town was start to change the zoning, and
They
I
had-
think my parents had a chance to get 2 year-round mobile home trailer sites.
They did that before the zoning was changed.
Before the zoning, yeah,
yes.
but they got that, so at first we were renting out the sites to military people from the base, and then they decided that it was more practical to have it just for the summer.
Well, what I think happened, okay, was people started coming and wanting to stay, and so what Dad did was, because in those days you could do it, he had trailers that he had a field, he'd put them in the field, he'd give them a garden hose for water, a little extension hose, and I mean little,
Extension cord.
cord
Yeah.
for electric, and if they were there long enough, he went around with a holding tank
That was my job, yeah.
That was your job.
right. So that kind of mushroomed. So then he decided to maybe I'll put in some more sites. So that's when he decided to put in a few sites. Of course, now you have zoning, and so you have to. So the lawyer said to him, however many sites you want, double it, because when you go, they're going to cut what you want. So our father said, I guess 65 sites, and they didn't cut it, which was good, because when he died in 1980, we only had 17 or 18 sites.
Yeah.
And now we have, because Eddie was able to bit by bit add, because
Yeah.
we had the permit.
So bring us up to date. What does it look like now? If one were to visit, what does your trailer park and cottages look like now?
We have 4 cottages, 3 of them are beachfront, and one's a lakefront cottage. They're good size, they're 3 bedrooms. We have the 65 sites, and we cater mostly to seasonals, but we do have a handful of sites that we use for overnight stays. My sister's house was built in the what was it, the 50s?
Yeah, 1950.
Where my grandfather lived, and then family members at one time or another occupied. My sister lives there now. And my grandmother's house on my father's side had a house built across the street, also in the 50s, right?
Yeah, it was.
And Janet lived there after, and then her son Tom lives there now. And that's about it. We did sell lots off, and we sold one cottage. There was a cottage on the top of the boat landing, and I'm trying to think when we sold it to Rick Anderson, and he rehabbed it and made it so it was a year-round property house. So.
Now, when I spoke to you a while ago, if my memory is correct, the original homestead that was there. Did you tell me that you had investigated and that original homestead, which is still there with a different use, and you can explain that, was the homestead of John Ewer?
Not necessarily. It's a foundation behind my sister's house that she made a greenhouse, or my parents had. That was originally the home of John Ewer.
Okay, so the foundation was still remaining.
Yeah,
that makes more
and
sense.
it was added to and modified a little bit, and like there was a water cistern in the back that's still there, and I keep digging up stuff from past. So, but other than that, I have no idea what else went on there.
No, it was just a farm.
Yeah.
You know, they had it as a farm. We always was a farm.
Yes, you
And where the house was built, where we grew up, that house, that was a field for horses and that. And then up, the barn was up by A and B site, the first two sites that were built. You know, and then the corn crib was still. We turned that. We tore that down in the 80s, I think. Didn't we?
Yeah.
So mid-80s.
It was on posts, and one hurricane blew it off the post, and it sat right on the ground, and it, the bottom moisture and everything.
I don't know how. We don't know how old it was either.
Yeah.
You know, it served a purpose.
Now, I know that St. John's Episcopal Church has been, through the years, very important to your family, to your mom and dad, and to the both of you. And of course, as a part of that, a big part of that, of course, is John Thomas, Reverend John Thomas. Could you talk a little bit about Reverend John Thomas and the exposure that you had to him? And I want you also to talk a little bit about the Thanksgiving dinners that your mom started up and that you continued.
Okay. Yeah, Reverend Thomas, I mean, he's an unusual minister because he did a lot of things in the community that you wouldn't think a minister would do. I mean, he got involved with Boy Scouts. At one time, I think he was a call firefighter, but having a family, I think of 5, and the boys in the family, I knew we went to Boy Scouts together.
You did, and he played a big part in the Boy Scouts today.
Right.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah,
And the brass band.
What's that?
The brass band.
Oh yeah, brass quintet or brass band ensemble.
What about that, Eddie?
Well, most of us were in the Sandwich school band, and we also did the church, and we used to play in the church for Christmas. At one time, we were going out. Well, they still do the tradition today.
Now, when did this start, though?
High school years, probably late 60s.
Okay.
Yeah. And as far as the community dinners, we started at the parish hall. My mother started it, and at that time, it was a smaller group. The kitchen facilities was kind of limited, and it was okay. We did pretty good. Typical Thanksgiving meal. After that, a lady named Monica Rogers had taken over, did that for a few years, and then when she decided to retire from that, Janet.
No, there was one or two other people.
Maybe Mr. Gilson. I know Mr. Gilson did Christmas. Thanks. No, he didn't.
This was somebody else. I don't have their name because I didn't know I
But
needed to have that information.
Your mother started these making Thanksgiving dinners.
And these other people took over for a few years.
At St. John's
Right.
for many years.
And then,
yep.
and then one year I found out Peggy Pola, who was like my second mom, said to me, "I don't think they're having the dinner this year." So we thought it was money. So I called Father John, and he said, money's not the issue. I don't think they have somebody to run it. So he gave me this name of this person, and I called, and I said, I'll do it. And it was 3 weeks before Thanksgiving.
Oh, no.
I didn't have a clue as to what I was doing, because I never did that before. And we did that for several years, and then we started doing a Christmas one too. But 212 was the last one we did. It was just, we were just getting so we couldn't do it. And we did it for a long time. You know, I used to take a week's vacation from the hospital to help, you know, get ready for this. And I just, we sent out feelers hoping somebody would take it over, but nobody did. And I know First Church, I think, I don't know if they did anything this year. I know last year, I think, and the year before, they had a dinner. But they didn't do, I don't believe they did home deliveries.
Yeah.
But in any case, what you did, which was, I think, wonderful, is you carried on your mother's tradition.
Right.
Well,
For
that's
many,
what
many
we wanted
years.
to do that, to
Absolutely.
honor her,
Yeah.
you know.
But moving to the Council of, what's
Sandwich Senior Center.
Yeah, Senior Center. We increased the number of people we served
Sure.
sit-down meal, as well as then we started doing deliveries, and
Yes.
that kind of mushroomed.
Oh, yeah, but it was good, you know, I mean, sometimes we had, I think one year we had like 50 home deliveries.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But-
Oh, I'm sure the townspeople appreciate
Yeah.
it.
But you know, it was good, fortunately had all the volunteers, people were good about volunteering.
Yes.
It's just nobody wanted to run it,
Yeah.
but I get so I'd have my list, you know, and when they call, I'll say, sometimes they'd say, I just want to do such and such, and then some would say, I'll do anything.
Yeah, so it's,
So-
you were able to pigeonhole them into the
Right,
different,
right.
the different chores.
Right.
Yep.
Now, a little bit of a segue, but
Well, yeah,
HT
because speaking of people that
Sure.
used to help was Al Osgood.
oh, okay.
He used to
yep.
be Eddie's second, he used to cook, remember? He
Yeah,
said?
yeah.
Yeah.
Same with Ed, what's his name? I can't think
Okay.
of his last name, but
Okay.
anyway, we've gone through so many people over the years helping, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
But,
Now, well, that really gives us a good flavor of, you know, the community and coming together with the community. And, you know, it's still happening in different places, but I think it's nice for, you know, people that are going to be looking at this video to know that your mother started it way back in the
She started when Dad died, no. It was 1980. 'Cause
Okay.
She started it to give her something to do, and so she wouldn't be alone. She wouldn't have been alone, but
Yes.
so she wanted to. So that's why she started it, you know. And it meant a lot to a lot of people. I had one lady volunteer one year who was newly widowed, and she came and she had her dinner with us. She says, "I have relatives that invited me." She says, "But I just couldn't do it, and I'm so glad I'm here." And people have their own reasons or whatever, and it's really good.
Yeah.
But
well, it
on
felt like family to her,
Right.
obviously. Yeah.
and same with the people that worked to help get the dinner prepared and stuff. They're all familiar with each other, and
Sure.
it was a get-together for them,
It
too.
was nice for them too.
Yeah.
Now, you both graduated from HT Wing School. Janet, maybe you first. You're a little older than Eddie, so
5.5 years.
5.5 years. Yeah, she'll
He's
always be
my-
older than you.
He's my baby brother.
Tell me a little bit about high school. What kind of social events did they have? And tell me about, I happen to know that you were a cheerleader. Tell me about that.
Well, I was not for a long time. I think when I was maybe junior high, and I don't know, maybe the beginning of high school.
Yeah.
Maybe sophomore year, I don't know. I really can't tell you much because
Who were the cheerleaders with you? Do you recall?
Nancy Foster, I think Judy Forney. I think Diane Cable was like the head of the cheerleaders.
Oh, yes.
There's a few others, but I don't know.
Yep. So what did you do what did the school do, provide for the kids back then for social events?
We didn't have a lot of social events, but we didn't get off the property that
You
much.
didn't
We
get off the
we
reservation.
See, in those days, you had South Sandwich, you were segregated, and the town, you weren't a townie, so we didn't really associate, and I really
Ridge
didn't.
people.
Huh?
Ridge people.
The Ridge people?
Yeah. No. Ridge.
Yeah, R-I-D-G-E.
You
Yes.
got it.
Yeah.
So I didn't really, hang out with the kids or, I got invited to one party when I was in high school that somebody, I'm not going to name, had a party in town, and I got one party. And so I didn't really associate that much. I did go with my junior prom.
Yeah.
And that was really nice. And
What about, did you ever go to the Harvest Festivals?
I was going to
yes,
say that.
Okay.
yeah,
I
okay.
was
There
gonna
were
say
harvest
that.
dance, yeah.
Yeah.
It's
And the
Eddie, can you
junior
talk-
prom.
Can you talk about that? What was the Harvest Festival?
It was like a carnival. The kids had games they played, like if you went to carnival, like at the fairgrounds.
Yeah.
And back then, we were allowed to use anything for prizes. So a lot of the kids would dig out toys or stuff that they're never going to use and donate it so we can give it out as prizes.
That would be a prize.
That was before. You couldn't do that. Now you got to have paid for brand new things.
Yeah, yeah.
But and the other thing too, every 4 years we used to go to the Eastern States Exposition, the whole school. And I went like in the late '60s, and it took 4 Greyhound buses,
Now, how many in your class?
30 some.
How about you, Janet?
33.
33 and 30.
And that,
Odd.
and when I graduated, that was the largest class at that time.
It was.
Yeah.
And then
33,
we
yeah.
used, probably shouldn't say this, but for graduation, for the stage and that, we got some rhododendrons, and guess where we got them? Dexter Estate.
Yeah.
Oh, boy. I bet that stage looked very pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I can interject,
Certainly.
going backwards?
Please.
You mentioned the Thomases. Well, the Thomases, we knew the Thomases for like 50 years or more. And we were all very close. And I used to babysit the kids when they were growing up.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe that Jane Thomas is now a grandmother. But when Father John came, when they first came, he was hadn't been ordained yet. So I think I was like 12 or 13 when they came. And then in later years, and he and our mother were very good friends. And when I guess Fran had a very bad accident on Sandwich Road.
Mrs. Thomas.
Mrs. Thomas.
When she was
and they-
working at Toby.
Yeah.
Right. So she's a nurse. Yeah.
They didn't know whether she was going to live or not, and he'd call every night. He'd call on the phone, and he and my mother must have talked for an hour or more. But anyway, and then in later years, towards the end of her life, they had called me to come and help take care, do a few things, and so I did maybe once or twice a week, depending on what they needed, and go in for a few hours and help her with, some care. And sometimes I took her to Spalding for rehab.
Oh, yes.
And sometimes I'd play a buffer because John would ask her a question, and it took her time because of her health to answer it. She couldn't spit it right out. And so I'd say, you need to give her a few minutes to answer you. But, they were very dear people. And
They were lovely. The contributions that both John and Fran Thomas gave to this town really are immeasurable, and they really are sorely missed. So Eddie, you went to H.G. Wing School also.
Yeah, I graduated in 1970. My class president was Mike Miller.
Mike Miller.
And let's see, who else?
Future Chief of Police.
And selectman today.
And a selectman today.
Bobby George, who was a fireman and now a selectman, he was also a classmate. We had Linda Stoll, who's been a teacher. I think she's retired now. I think she was the class secretary. And I was a student council rep. So we got to do things that were always the first. We, in our senior year, we had a senior room.
A senior room?
Senior room. It was off the side of the auditorium, where the cafeteria, where the old part of Henry T. Wing is. And I think we kind of lost it for the future classes, but we had fun. We even had in class or during school hours, a car wash.
Really?
We did that, and we washing the cars down by the shop, you know, the wood shop.
The wood shop.
That Mr. Schleicher was the instructor. So we'd get the cars from the teachers, the keys. People would trust us, and we washed them, of course. But you know, we'd always take the long way back to the front parking lot. We drove around Morse Road and up Beale Avenue and park it. You know.
Yeah, just to make sure it was running right.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. That would have
including
been important.
Mrs. Goodwin. She had that little MG Sprint. She was the chemistry teacher.
Mrs. Goodwin. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I'm trying to think. Well, we went to that Big E exposition. That was fun. It was a time when the show in the arena in Springfield had Diane Ross and the Supremes before they became
really
headliners.
Famous.
And it was like, yeah, that was great, but it's like that was before they became famous, you know. But
and so the whole school went to the Eastern States.
yeah, you must have went in earlier.
Gee, I can't remember that we did. No.
Well, maybe it's a one-time shot.
That was sort of yeah.
No, because I went.
Did you
class
go?
went.
Yeah.
I don't remember how many, if the whole school, high school went or not. I just vaguely remember going.
Yes. Yeah. So that was certainly a social event.
The other thing is, when I was growing up, the school was always expanding. You know, first grade we had it in the old wing school. I think it was on the first floor, and we had the old cafeteria. I think we went to that cafeteria for the whole 12 years. But the second class, we were in the wing towards Beale Avenue, and we went
The addition.
Yeah, so we had I had Miss Consolini for second grade, Mrs. Alvisi, of course, for third, and Mrs. Johnson for fourth. And then we moved to the basement of the old wing school, where we had fifth and sixth, and then they built a new addition towards Morse Road, and then we had the rest of the schooling in those.
Yeah.
But it's like kept moving from building to building almost.
But still in that same site, I want to make sure that
Yeah.
we're clear. None of the new schools out in East Sandwich and Forestdale were there. It
In
was
fact,
all at one location.
In fact, that last addition that they built towards Beale Avenue wasn't done while we were going to school. It was the first section. I think that was built
Well, they got
probably in the
portable
60s.
classrooms too.
Yeah.
At that point,
Yeah.
I don't know when, but it was after me.
But anyways.
On a side note there, one thing I do remember, this isn't a social event, was like we had a dress code, and which they probably laugh at today. I'm not sure they have one today after I see how some are dressed, but girls could not wear culottes to school. And one of my classmates did, and she got suspended. Mrs. Tyson suspended her.
Oh yeah.
You know, which today you look at how ridiculous that is, but back then things
Oh,
were
we couldn't wear jeans.
You know,
T-shirts. They had the shirt had to have a collar.
So it's just.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the that's for the men. For the girls, it had to be. Could you wear slacks?
I don't think so. I don't really. It was
Dresses,
always
skirts.
dresses or skirts.
Yeah.
You know, you never thought about it. That's how you grew up.
Sure,
You know.
sure, yeah.
And never really thought anything about it. You know.
Yeah.
But
Major events in town. Now I understand that you lived out in South Sandwich, and and I understand from Janet's comments that sometimes just because you live so far out, you know, you didn't get to be able to do things that perhaps were held in town, if you will, Sandwich, the center of Sandwich. But you must have done a few things here. You must have traveled in and done a few things. What can you tell us?
Well,
what those might have been?
I remember on 4th of July when we were kids. One time we had a boat. We had in the boat parade. You know, but that was a lot of work. And I remember coming in for the fireworks. Those are two things.
On Shawn Pond.
Right.
Yep.
That was a big thing to see. And everybody. It was really nice. And I can't really.
Now the Memorial Day parades.
Yes.
Were you in those?
When I was young, you must have been too.
Yeah,
I was, because I was a bluebird and I was a campfire girl, because Aunt Bertha had the campfire girls.
I want to hear about Eddie being in Memorial Day, but could you please continue with Aunt Bertha? Tell us a little bit about Aunt Bertha.
Well, anyway, she was a very, she and her husband, they never had any kids, so I think we were her kids. And we used to sometimes make plaster of Paris. She had plaster of Paris molds, different things we'd make. And
that was just the Girl Scouts, right? Not Horizon.
Campfire.
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 She
Okay.
had the
Birds,
Bluebird.
Campfire, and Horizon. That's how it went.
Yeah.
And I was in all three. And Fran Silva had the Horizon girls.
Yes. Okay.
And
she became our future
town nurse.
Yes.
Yes, she
Yep.
did. Yes.
And Aunt Bertha lived on Pleasant Street, right in the center of town.
Yes, she did.
Yeah, right next to the Adams, right? Or no?
Yes, across the street.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I remember spending time there, and I can't really,
But you did march in the Memorial Day
several
parades.
parades I marched in. I just don't, But now, you couldn't get me. I stay away from crowds. It would be too hard. Like, I'd love to see fireworks, but what I'd have to go through to get to, no, because I can't walk a long distance.
Yeah, as we
And
get older.
if I could go and park and they're right there, that would be fine. But so I don't even anything today that's a crowd, like the memorial, the new memorial at the town hall there for the Vietnam veterans.
Yeah.
I've seen it, but someday I'm going to park right there and get out and look at it.
Yes.
But I was told there was like 1,000 people that went to that. I don't know.
It was
But
very well attended.
I said, I couldn't handle all those people.
Yeah.
Eddie.
You were in the Memorial Day parade.
Yeah, at first it was Boy Scouts parading. We had a lot of different scoutmasters, and Father John, I don't know how he got the communication to get volunteers, but most of them were Air Force personnel, including Al Osgood and John McLaughlin was another one. And we paraded in the Memorial Day parade, and then later, when I'm in the school band, the school marched. That was pretty interesting because we didn't do much march practice.
You didn't.
No.
Who was the head of the high school band?
At
that time?
Went through. I think Mr. Gregg was the first one.
Okay.
And we had a lady, and I'm trying to think. There was several others, but I can only remember Mr. Gregg.
Do you remember some of the other Sandwich Band members?
Yes, yeah. John Thomas, he played the French horn, I think. And we had Rusty McDonald. His parents had the McDonald hardware and then the Sandwich hardware. I think he was the person with baton. I don't know. He was percussion. He did drums, but
He also sort of led the parade?
led the parade.
Yeah.
I think Diane Martin was in there as another front leader. And then we had Mary Ann Miller. She played either clarinet or flute, one of the Velzers. Scott Torrey.
Jeannie Velzer?
It might be Jeannie. I think she played the flute.
Yeah.
Flute or the clarinet. And I'm trying to think who else.
Now, did you go to other towns to play, or was it mainly in Sandwich?
Some of us went to other towns, like a regional ensemble. Like they would pick certain people out of each town's band, and they would practice together, and then they would play at a certain event. But that's like once once a year.
Once a year, yeah.
And then we played brass group. We played Christmas time. I'm trying to think what else. Oh, sometimes Easter too. Because I remember one time we were doing an Easter event, and it was down by Sean Pond at the bandstand.
Yes.
And it was so cold. I played a trombone, and the slide kept freezing. Because by the afternoon we had snow.
Yeah.
You know, and it was a time where we'd have that, and we'd go over to the First Church of Christ, and Frank Adams would prepare a breakfast. It was like a big Easter breakfast.
Oh, how nice.
I don't know who was invited. I think it was open to the public. But those are the times. The other time was the Sandwich Fire Department would have a clam bake down at the fire station on 6A.
Sure.
And that's one thing that was nice. But again, it was a small crowd back then.
Oh, gosh, yes.
And the other thing was my father. He was in the early 60s, I think, or late 50s. The town didn't have much of a police force, so they had a group of volunteers that brought up like an auxiliary force.
Auxiliary police.
I mean, you know, so it was like at least 20 or more. This is, I think, when Mr. Foster and John Weaver were like the only police
The
force.
only really paid
Yeah.
police, yes. Was your dad an auxiliary
Yeah.
policeman?
Yeah, there's a bunch of them.
Yeah.
I know Joe Rosa. I know William Buckley.
Ollivander.
Bill
and,
Buckley?
Yeah, and Ollivander. There's a slew.
Mr. Forney.
Mr. Forney. Yeah.
So they would call them out for special things, for parades and
Well, you
things.
went- they
But
went-
Parades and even like the school dances. They had to have some type of official legal enforcement
Sure.
person to be at the dances.
But what gets me is they would go and volunteer their time. Now, when they have things like that, they don't volunteer, they get paid. And they have to have police presence, they get paid.
yeah. Times have changed.
Yeah.
You know.
Now, before we close, this has just been wonderful. It's been so interesting for me. I hope it has for you too. But before we close, I always like to ask, is there something that you'd like to share, story, whatever, that I haven't touched on, that you'd like to share before we close?
I can't.
Okay.
I'll think
Eddie?
of something after
Yeah,
we close.
right.
In Boy Scouts, my first camping trip was a camporee, you know, for the Cape,
Oh, sure.
and it was to Nantucket.
Oh, wow.
And
well, that was something special.
I was a real greenhorn at the time for camping. So we had to walk out from the ferry out to the state reservation, walk over the cobblestones. And I wasn't too well packed my gear.
Oh.
By the time I got down there, I'm like holding most of my stuff in my hand because everything kept coming out of the bag and that. But it was an experience, yeah.
That was quite something. About how old were you then?
I think it was 63, so I was like 11 or 12.
See, that was a huge thing for 11 or 12-year-old, you know, to get on a boat and go over to Nantucket. In those days, you know, we just didn't get to do things like that, you know, back then. Well, you sure, Janet?
I'm sure.
Okay.
Thanks for having us.
Right.
Well, this has been so delightful. This video, Tell Me a Story, will be broadcast on Sandwich Community TV, which we could not do this program and this project without them. We so thank them so much for all their help. And we'll also be putting this video that you can see on the Sandwich Public Library on the Archives website, which is within the Sandwich Public Library's website. So thank you very much, and this is the end of this one. We'll see you again for another Tell Me a Story.